Oh, oh, I was on mute, so sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's event, The Path to Advocacy, Turning Stories into Action. My name is Jenna Doyle, and I am the Director of Programs and Congressional Engagement at HillVets. And I am super excited about tonight's conversation with not only one HillVets 100 honoree, but two. So as you may all have known, we are running the HillVets 100 and 100 virtual promotion series, and we're gathered here tonight to discuss the stories of these veteran advocates and how they have become strong voices within the veteran community. So without further ado, I'm just going to briefly introduce our panelists, and then I'm going to turn it over to them so that they can tell you a little bit about who they are and what they do. So we are first joined by Ashlynne Haycock, who is the Deputy Director of Policy at Tragedy Assistance Programs for Survivors, or TAPS for short. And we're also joined by Kristofer Goldsmith, who is the founder and president of High Ground Veterans Advocacy. So a special thank you to the both of you for joining us tonight, as well as a thank you to all of those tuning in at home. And now we're going to let you two introduce yourselves to those watching. Ashlynne, if you can just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then we'll get the conversation started.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you guys so much for having me. It's a huge honor to be one of the HillVets 100 and be back talking to you guys. I am Ashlynne Haycock. I'm the Deputy Policy and Legislative Director at TAPS. For those who don't know TAPS, TAPS is the national organization for those who lost a loved one in the military. So we represent a slightly different population than most veteran organizations, but fill a much needed gap. I'm also the surviving daughter of Army Sergeant First Class Jeffrey Haycock, who died while training to deploy in 2002 when I was in elementary school, and the surviving daughter of Air Force veteran Nicole Haycock, who died by suicide in 2011 when I was a sophomore at American University. So I've been on staff at TAPS for 8 years now, and really enjoy working on the higher ed policy mostly, but a little bit of everything.
Great, thanks, Ashlynne. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do as well?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. It's awesome to be back with HillVets. I missed the monthly events and the get-togethers we used to have. Hopefully, everybody's getting their shots so we can start doing this again soon. So I am an Army veteran, served with the 3rd Infantry Division as a forward observer, was in Iraq in 2005, been out since about 2007. And I created a program called High Ground Veterans Advocacy, where we are essentially looking for the stereotypical poster girl or poster boy of whatever issue it is that they want to bring to the attention of policymakers with the goal of improving the lives of service members, veterans, and our families. So what we do is we have a competitive applications process, a lot like the HillVets Fellows, but rather than being in congressional offices, we're coming from the outside. So we'll, after a few weeks of online training, fly everyone into DC, get kind of like a real world road rules kind of Airbnb situation for a week where everyone lives together and works together. And there we introduce folks who might otherwise have no experience in policy at all into how to get a law passed. And we've had a pretty good track record. We're not really a jobs program, but we've helped to launch the career of several veteran advocates who've, since training a few years ago, dedicated their lives and they've worked for various major veteran service organizations. And we look forward to getting back to doing this kind of training once DC returns to normal and we can have people in the same room together.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. So you both are extremely accomplished, and I wonder why you have made the HillVets 100 list. We're excited and honored to have you featured on that list, and we're really excited to learn more about the work that you do here tonight. So I want to start by both asking you and kind of pointing to the fact that you both have very personal stories and connections to the work that you do, which has probably and most likely driven you to become the advocates that you are. But I want to ask, what kind of made you or pushed you into advocacy work, and what kind of influenced you to turn around and help others in your community? Ashlynne, you want to start us off?
Sure. So my career in advocacy started when I was 10 years old. When my dad died, my mom got very involved. She was a DoD employee in making sure she worked on the fight for the widow's tax, the ending the SBPDIC offset. When she realized that she was not receiving the full benefits she should have after my dad had served almost 20 years in the military. And so she got really involved in that fight. She was on the government relations committee for Goldsmith Wives of America. She would drag my brothers and I to DC. We grew up in Oklahoma, so it was a trek a couple times a year to walk the halls of Capitol Hill and meet with offices. And I thought it was the coolest thing ever when we would go. And it was fun and it was exciting. And it was something that, no one I knew had experienced. And, when it came time for college, it was pretty obvious to me that I wanted to be in DC. I wanted to pursue political science. I wanted to be on the Hill and continue to do the type of work that my mom had done. And when I graduated, I started working at TAPS and had been through, I received the Frye Scholarship and the GI Bill and all of the benefits, but I also had become very well aware of the gaps and things that existed. Which is, how Chris and I know each other really, is Forever GI Bill and the work we did there. But, having seen that, I went to a private university and some of my classmates were eligible for the Yellow Ribbon Scholarship, but because my dad had died, I wasn't at the time. And so many of the different programs and things that I started to see the gaps myself, and having been through, all of the Capitol Hill stuff with my mom, started to push for making those equities for the survivor community myself.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Thank you for that. Chris, what about you? What was your push to really turn around and help your community?
Yeah, so my story is somewhat similar to Ashlynne's, how it was really tragedy that brought me to advocacy. And, I think that the two of us have figured out that advocacy, being proactive in fixing those loopholes that you're falling through and that people like you are falling through, can be part of, like, a major part of the healing process. Mm-hmm. For me, it came from my deployment in 2005. Wasn't that rough in terms of a combat deployment. There are people who see far worse combat than me. But at the age of 19, it was my job to photograph mass graves. And yeah, like, people tried to shoot us and blow us up now and then and everything. But I came home with problems that I didn't have the vocabulary to describe. And being active duty in the Army in 2006, 2007, PTSD wasn't really part of the lexicon yet. Soldiers like myself didn't really understand it. We didn't talk about it. So when I was experiencing things like panic attacks, I had no idea what was happening. I ended up attempting suicide in the summer of 2007. I had been a sergeant and kind of the golden boy for my unit. And after that, I was just treated like a criminal. And within 3 months, I went from Sergeant Goldsmith to Chris living in his childhood bedroom. And from there, because I was issued bad paper, a general discharge, didn't qualify for the GI Bill anymore. So I came out into what became the Great Recession without any real prospects at a job, and with what was then undiagnosed PTSD. Now, thankfully, my mother literally made me to go to the VA, threatened to kick me out of the house if I didn't go to the VA. And that was the push that I needed. The VA, saved my life. Being unemployed, I had a lot of time for treatment for a few years. And eventually, when I reached a point where I was ready to go to school, I started sharing my story. After being kind of isolated from the veterans community with bad paper, without an honorable discharge, I didn't really associate with vets or vets groups or anything like that. But once I started getting involved in my student veterans group, that was my next major step forward in terms of my recovery. And there I met a mentor who had been a senior staffer for then Senator Carl Levin, who at the time was the chair of the Armed Services Committee. And through some great coaching, I learned from a staffer's point of view, from a senior staffer's point of view, what makes a good advocate. And I have, in my first year from the day that I first set foot in Capitol Hill, I got a law pass. And I kind of got addicted. It's with every law that we've gotten passed, like Ashlynne mentioned the Forever GI Bill, the good that we feel that we're doing is almost impossible to describe. And it's how I've continued to serve my country. The Army didn't work out for me the way that I expected it to. But through advocacy and learning how to create a program to train others to become advocates, I've found purpose in life, and have taken that tragedy like Ashlynne has and turned it into something really good.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. And thank you both for sharing your stories. I really appreciate your openness and honesty in expressing maybe the tragedy that you have experienced and really how you turned that into something really powerful. So thank you both for sharing that. I do want to note to our audience out there, if you have questions or comments for either Chris or Ashlynne, or topics that you'd like us to discuss, feel free to drop them in the comments and we will get to them hopefully towards the end of our discussion. So both of you, you have experienced many different roles and you've gone through many different things through your careers in advocacy, but I want to kind of talk about what are the challenges that you have faced and how, as advocates or professionals, have you really overcome them to achieve something great? Chris, you want to start us off with that?
Sure. So I think the biggest challenge is having realistic expectations in what you can accomplish. And I'm a big believer in incrementalism, where I'll set a tremendous goal. Like most of my advocacy work has been around the issue of bad paper, helping vets who went through similar experiences that I did, who had PTSD, traumatic brain injury, military sexual trauma, didn't get the treatment that they needed while they were serving. And instead of being treated as patients, they were treated like criminals and booted out without benefits. So I've spent most of my time helping pull people back into the system. And that has been something that is frustrating, because at the end of the day, there are 500,000 veterans in this country with other than honorable discharges, which is a discharge characterization just a little bit below me. And despite, really like almost 15 years of work on a single issue, those 500,000 veterans, while we did a few years ago pass a law that opened up the VA to them, they're still not in the VA. So, I've still got to, even though we passed this law in the beginning of the Trump administration, I've now got to go to the Biden administration and try and convince them that it's important not just to open up access to the VA, but to be proactive and to get these new patients in who, for some of them, they're Vietnam vets and they've gone without treatment for half a century.
Mm-hmm. Wow, thank you. Ashlynne, what about you? Any challenges that you faced or you'd like to share?
Yeah, so personally, it was being the youngest person in the room, always. I started at TAPS at 22 years old. I graduated college 2 weeks prior and started getting thrown into meetings with the Secretary of the VA and the Secretary of Defense and members of Congress. And I looked like I was 17, 18 years old. And, they didn't always take me seriously at first. I really had to fight to explain why I deserved to be at the table. And why the thoughts and ideas and things that I had mattered, and why they should take into consideration the things that I had to say. And then for a while, some of the big names had started to be accepting of what I was doing. But then I'd get to a meeting or a presentation, at a event, and they're like, "Oh, are you her intern?" No, I'm here to do the presentation. I know I look young, but I actually do know what I'm talking about. And so it caused a lot of problems for several years, just being able to get in the door in places. Even now I'm the same age as a lot of people in policy. I'm turning 30 in a couple of months, but it was rough at the beginning. But professionally, it's also been, representing a population that everyone forgets exists. they write GI Bill benefit programs and they forget to add the word "and survivors." And so those programs don't include our population. And so I have to be the person screaming in the background, "Don't forget us" in that. And they always say that that was their intent. But, how many times over do we have to remind them to not forget our, these families, that you can do all these great things for veterans, but if you exclude the survivors, you're going to have to go back and fix it later. Let's try and be proactive and do things up front.
Definitely. Well, you both hit on some things that I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, and struggles and challenges are definitely part of the journey. But what makes it even better is the accomplishments that you're really able to achieve. So I'd like to, you hit the lows and now we're going to hit the highs. So what are your biggest accomplishments throughout your career, or even personally, that you're very proud of and you look back on and think, wow, I did something really amazing there? Ashlynne, you want to start?
So I have two. My biggest the bill that I've worked the most on in all of my years has been ending the widow's tax, which we finally did in 2019. I spent 9 years going to the Hill with my mom as a teenager, fighting for that injustice to make sure our military widows received the benefits that they were entitled to. And my mom started working on that issue in 2002. 17 years working on that bill. And widows before my mom worked on it for 20 years prior to that. It was a 40-year battle. And so to have been a big part of the, getting it over the finish line at the end, and TAPS and MOA and VFW and Gold Star Wives and the National Military Family Association and, the coalition we built that really kind of, we went all in 2019, all of us, to do it was incredible. And, I felt very honored to be able to honor my mom that way. But also the passage of the Cheryl Langford Memorial Act last year. Cheryl Langford was a widow who was very involved in so many policy things and who I considered a dear friend. And when she died of cancer in 2020, we realized that DOD was not going to help take care of her son. And so to be able to honor her that way and to make sure that going forward, DOD will provide casualty services to Gold Star families where both parents have died was pretty incredible too. And a great way to honor someone who was a dear friend, and to have helped write that bill was probably one of my favorite ones to work on.
That's amazing to be able to honor both of those important people in your life in that way. Must have been incredible. So Chris, can you top either of those accomplishments?
I can't, no. And actually the first thing that comes to mind is a story that Ashlynne is usually the one telling, about how the forever part of the forever GI Bill became a thing. So I'll let her tell that story.
Steal your thunder.
Long story short, it's not a long story, it's a short story. The biggest bills start from a bunch of people, advocates and staff, sitting around the table and just kind of shooting out ideas. And one of the ideas that I shot out was like, hey, so we have this arbitrary cap, 15 years after you serve, your GI Bill just magically disappears. I know that we don't, the congressional budget doesn't really, they pretend that money doesn't exist beyond that far out, beyond 10 years. So why is there this cap? Like technically that if we were to remove the cap, it wouldn't cost us any money because it's make-believe beyond that point. And the staffers around the room kind of like perked up and were like, oh yeah, that's a good point. And they ran it by the lawyers, and it was something we could do. And so that's like my proudest piece of like an accidental, really important thing that I accomplished. But the more like, I guess, personal stuff is watching my high ground fellows, meet their successes in driving policy changes. One of our first fellows, Maureen Elias, is probably someone that a lot of people watching this know of. She went on to work at Vietnam Veterans America, is now at PVA. She's a super accomplished, like, badass who, when she tells her story, she's like, well, when I applied for High Ground, I didn't know what advocacy was. And now it's my whole life. So like everything that she does, I'm just like, yeah.
Yeah. Special shout out to Maureen, honestly. A special shout out to Maureen.
My other fellows are like doing that kind of thing. And to like have been able to play like a small part in like getting them addicted to policymaking is awesome.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think we definitely can relate to that too as an organization, watching our fellows go out and really accomplish amazing things. And both of you have done incredible things in your communities, and so you should be very proud of yourselves. And a reason again why you're on the HillVets 100 list and why you're here tonight. So we talk about advocacy, we talk about being an advocate. What advice do you have for those out there who are looking to get involved in advocacy? Or what advice do you have for people who just don't know how to be an advocate and they want to be an advocate in their communities? What can you say to them? Ashlynne, thoughts on that?
Yeah, so one, anyone can be an advocate if they're passionate about something. And that's something that I constantly remind our community, especially our teenagers and our young adults who have expressed interest in the policy world. But the other piece that I preach to them is please come to the table with facts. If you're going to bring me a proposal or an idea or something, don't come to me with a rumor of something you heard that you never actually researched and then stand up in front of a panel or something and say it. Please do your research. Please, there are reasons that some things are never going to happen. They are never going to happen. And we get so many people who come to us with, an idea, but they didn't really think it through, or they didn't write it out, and they didn't research it, and they didn't figure out that, there's a reason that we can never ever do this, or the doors it's going to open. And so, I want everyone to bring me their ideas, but I also want them to do their research and make sure they're solid in advance. There's nothing worse than somebody standing up and asking, a question when you're giving a presentation or things like that, or in a meeting with something that's so far-fetched out there that they heard on a rumor from so-and-so that's, fake news. And then you have to explain to them why what they brought you isn't the best idea, or not a real idea, or not an actual issue in real world. So, that's my advice, is please do your research. We want you in the space. We're always, looking for more and more advocates, but, part of being a responsible advocate is doing your research.
Definitely. That's great advice. Chris, anything to add advice to those watching or looking to become advocates or involved in advocacy? You're on mute. See, now I'm not the only one who really flubbed up over here with the muting.
Nope.
There you go. There you are. We had you for, nope.
How about now?
There you go. There you are.
Okay. Sorry, my Bluetooth settings just
worries.
That's why you probably saw me like frantically typing.
It's always the AirPods. Always the AirPods.
So the best piece of advice I think I can give is for people to advocate about stuff that they're passionate about. There are good ideas that you may come across when you're doing research into policy. And, there are things that you believe are like, oh, well, okay, this is a common sense thing. This is achievable. But if you're coming to a meeting, I find that a lot of the time, meeting with congressional staff, one of the most important things is to connect with them on a personal level. Because at the end of the day, they're going to meet hundreds of people every single year, and you have to make yourself memorable. The way to make yourself memorable is to work on something that you are passionate about, that you are connected with. Now, once you've done like Ashlynne and I, we shared our kind of like genesis stories, how we became advocates, right? Once you advocate for something that you are truly passionate about, which means you're going to put in the work that's needed, you're going to put in the passion that's needed. it gets way easier to adopt things that maybe you're not so passionate about, especially if you're looking to work in the industry. There are a lot of, the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, has thousands and thousands of amendments every single year, and reading that gets tough. But, and you have to learn, if you're potentially, advocating for or against hundreds of amendments at once, if you're coming to the table without having any background and experience in having achieved or at least worked towards progress on something that you are passionate about, it's going to be much, much harder. You don't want your first experience with advocacy to be boring, because when you meet with people, and you're trying to convince them to change their mind, to get their boss to endorse something, if you're not passionate, they're not going to be passionate, their boss isn't going to be passionate, and nothing's going to happen. You're going to be wasting everyone's time.
Definitely. Great advice. Thank you. So we're kind of moving towards the end of our conversation here. So I just want a last minute reminder to those watching. If you have any questions, comments you'd like to share with Ashlynne or Chris, feel free to drop them in the comments below, and we will try and get to them before we finish up. So we've talked a little bit about your careers and what it's been like to be an advocate in the veteran space. But I want to kind of finish by asking a future question as we look ahead to this new Congress, to this new year, and we're moving ahead just, generally into the future. What types of causes and issues can you expect veteran advocates like yourself to be championing or working towards in the next year, in the next 2 years? Ashlynne, what about you?
I mean, so the two big hot button issues that, everyone is talking about: toxic exposure, suicide prevention. Every veteran advocate is working in some capacity on those two issues, no matter how big or small. Those are going to be kind of two of the big things that we see a lot this year, especially with President Biden's connection to toxic exposure and his son Beau having most likely died from exposure from cancer. So you'll see a lot going there. But for TAPS, in addition to those issues, we're looking at allowing surviving spouses to maintain benefits upon remarriage. That's been a big one, and looking at making sure that 25-year-old widows don't have to choose between being financially secure and being happy. And then we're also looking at things like the DIC increase, though I still have to find $20 billion somewhere in the federal budget to pay for that. Always the fun part of the job. And my passion has always been GI Bill and education. And so looking at, GI Bill parity for all survivors. We have great benefits for active duty post 9/11 families, but we don't have great benefits for pre 9/11 families or non-active duty families. Or, we look at especially our suicide and exposure losses. Most of them don't happen necessarily on active duty, and those families don't get the same benefits. And honestly, they're not even in the same, they're not even comparable. They're just so terrible. So looking at ways to kind of build those benefits out for the families. So, we had a huge win already this year and finally closing the 90/10 loophole, which was something Chris and I have both worked on for many, many years. So to see that kind of come across the finish line was something I thought that we would be spending this year on. And we managed to pull that off way earlier than we thought.
Sure. Great. Hot button issues. Chris, anything to add?
Yeah. So if you follow me on social media for the last 3 or 4 years, you've probably been annoyed by my constant posts about disinformation and extremism and radicalization in the veterans community. That's something that since January 6th is kind of a hot topic. I was kind of the one person in the veteran advocacy community who had the, privilege of being able to research this stuff before it was on the forefront of the average American's mind. But as we've seen, the Capitol insurrection was serious. Two of the first 5 people to die during that insurrection were veterans themselves. So what I'm trying to convince the VA to do is get involved in, and this, will take some pressure from Congress, hopefully some laws to make it permanent, is to adopt cyber hygiene as an essential aspect of veterans' overall healthcare. The way that I can simplify an example of how this matters is if you have a veteran who's constantly just, on conspiracy theory websites, believes everything that they see on Facebook, now they're not taking the COVID vaccine because they think, oh, it's a microchip or it's 5G or something. I mean, like, this crazy stuff is real. That person's probably not going to the VA. They're probably not getting the health care that they need. And as they age, the lack of care is going to stack up on top of disabilities. And it's, in the end, going to cost the government more money to take care of these people. And, in the most extreme cases, we're going to see insurrectionists storming the Capitol. I mean, if I said that a year ago, which is something that I was talking about, people probably would have thought I was crazy. But what we saw on January 6th is not an anomaly. This is part of a pattern that is continuing. So I'm going to keep ringing the alarm bells, raising the red flags, whatever metaphor you want to use, about cyber hygiene and why the VA needs to get involved in helping vets stay connected to reality and stay safe on the internet.
Definitely. So you actually brought up this, kind of piqued my interest, because you're both bringing up very issues that legislation needs to happen to make a change or to improve something. And so part of that is bipartisanship or policy lines. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are of how bipartisanship factors into advocacy, maybe in a general sense, but also specifically on the issues that you all work on, because it's really important that you're advocating and working always with both sides to make sure that things get done. So, Chris, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, anybody who's friends with me, anybody who has worked with me is probably pretty easily able to tell I'm an anti-Trump guy, and I always was and vehemently was. That was an anomaly. Trump was hopefully a one-time thing. But I wasn't able to work with the White House for 4 years because I wouldn't pretend to like that man or anyone who worked for him. So I basically committed to being less effective because it aligned better with my value system that way. But regular Republicans, old school Republicans, I have drinks with all the time. HillVets has been one of the greatest facilitators of bipartisanship that I know of, period. Not just in the veterans community, but in Capitol Hill. It's pretty, for our generation, it's pretty uncommon for Democrats and Republicans to have a good working relationship. But one of the things that I tell my fellows is that the things that make Washington go round is this and this. It's one of either the coffee cup or the whiskey glass. As long as you have a cup in your hand and you're sitting across the table or next to somebody who also has a cup in their hand, you're probably going to be an effective advocate.
Mm-hmm. Great. Ashlynne, any thoughts on bipartisanship and advocacy?
So my boss, Candace Wheeler, always says that veterans issues are not bipartisan issues. They're nonpartisan issues, because the reality is veterans issues and our military issues shouldn't be thrown into politics. And generally the committees have done a pretty good job of doing so. We've had pretty good luck with chairmen and ranking members who work well together and understand putting veterans interests above politics. And the VSO space in particular is pretty small, and we all know each other. We all work well with each other. We're all friends. I mean, Chris and I have had drinks together more times than I can count, especially this summer for the GI Bill. And there are times that we're in meetings where we don't always we agree on what we're trying to do is the best thing for the community. We may not always agree on the path to get there, but we can also walk out of that meeting and not hate each other for seeing things that way, and then just have a drink together and move on and work on the next issue that we can agree on. And so, it's what I love about this space in particular is that everyone cares, everyone genuinely cares, and everyone tries to work well together and get along. You know, we all like each other. We all are friends. You know, I'm getting married this year, and my maid of honor I met through policy. So, you know, it's one of those spaces where people actually care, and the bipartisanship comes from, you know, accepting that we all want to do the best thing for veterans. You know, I can have drinks with somebody who works in Ted Cruz's office and Elizabeth Warren's office in the same week, and no one's going to be upset with each other about it. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you both so much. That's really great advice and things. You mentioned a lot of things that a lot of people can really consider and take to heart when thinking about advocacy and how to really be an advocate for their causes or their passions. So thank you all for that. Okay, well, I think we're nearing the end of our conversation. I don't know if either of you have any closing thoughts you'd like to share. Feel free. And I'd like to encourage all of those out there to continue following HillVets on all social media platforms to stay up to date on all things HillVets 100 and 100. We have some great upcoming events. And we look forward to having you all in the future and to hosting Chris and Ashlynne in person, hopefully at the gala, and give you the honoring that you so deserve for being featured on the HillVets 100. So I thank you both for being here tonight, and really appreciate your time and your candor and honesty with our conversation. And hopefully we'll see each other soon at a happy hour or at the gala in the near future. So thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good happy hour.